One of the best things that could happen to a young player at the top of the game in tennis is being compared to the all-time greats in the sport.
Let's be clear, this is a generational player here.
However, being compared to legends of the sport is also one of the worst things that could happen to any player, because it only leads us down a rabbit hole and leaves everyone with no concrete conclusions at the end of the day. Right now, Iga Świątek is the subject of debate among tennis fans, and all sorts of comparisons have been made. Sides have been picked and opinions have been formed. But just how dominant has Świątek been in the last couple of years, and should she even be compared to the GOATs of the sport? How does Iga's game stack up against her closest rivals Sabalenka and Rybakina? And what other puzzles does the so-called Iga Świątek era have for us?
Pretty amazing, really demolished the second best player in the world. No?
We'll dive into all that and much more, but first I have to tell you, you won't see me on camera this video because I'm currently in Strasbourg at the WTA 500 event, and I'm really looking forward to Roland Garros. Iga just won the Italian Open after beating Aryna Sabalenka in the final, and she now leads the tour with a 38-4 record and 4 titles this season. And she hasn't been winning just any titles either. She has 4 WTA 1000 titles this year. It's becoming ridiculous at this point. But why has she been such a winning machine this year? Really, when I see questions like what makes Iga so good, it's kind of difficult to answer because, well, there are a lot of different things. Iga has upped her average first serve to around 115 miles per hour, give or take. And she's usually notching a win percentage of around 70 to 75% from those serves. Iga isn't remotely close to her rivals when it comes to firing down aces, but she does make a lot of service winners and also dictates points from those serves. I'd take that over making so many double faults like some of her closest competitors. For me, it's really the consistency. You don't even have to look too far back to see how Iga's first serve came to the rescue in Rome. Iga saved all 7 breakpoints she faced in the final, often doing so with strong first serves right into Sabalenka's body. I would also argue that Iga has one of the best second serves on the tour at the moment. No other player can boast of a higher win percentage from their second serve than Iga this year. And don't even get me started on her ground strokes and court coverage. Iga is a monster on the return, which speaks volumes about her playing style. We saw how strong her depth on the return was, and this proved to be a huge factor in Rome. With Iga's return quality, opponents are often forced into hitting that extra ball or redlining the next shot, and this makes it more likely that they're going to make errors. Iga's super aggressive style on clay is helped by forehand topspin that's been compared in some ways to what we saw on the ATP Tour from prime Rafa. Of course, those comparisons aren't apples to apples, but looking at the insane revolutions per minute on those topspin shots, it becomes easy to see why so many opponents struggle against Świątek's forehand. There's a whole lot of spin and speed on the forehand, making it the heaviest shot on the WTA Tour. And then we have a super consistent backhand that also isn't too far from being among the best on tour. When it comes to movement, it gets even more ridiculous. Iga's footwork is insane. No one changes direction better than her, and you'll be hard-pressed to find a better mover on the WTA Tour. Coco Gauff fans might argue on that one though. But the point is that Świątek has the ability to attack and defend on both wings, stepping into the court quickly. Even when on the defense, she can quickly transition rallies into offense. Iga's anticipation also makes her movement even better, and the way she slides in both directions, even on hard courts, is just mind-boggling to me. We could also talk about her tennis IQ, which is something that has often been overlooked. Świątek usually seems to know the right shot to go for. So, although she's super aggressive and likes to smother her opponents for a living, she actually does so in a rather controlled way, going for the higher percentage shots more often than not. Iga is patient with point construction and works with percentages rather than just ripping the ball. Does this make her a less exciting player for some fans? Maybe. But I don't care because the results speak for themselves. Iga might not exactly be a walking highlight reel as often as some fans might want, but that's completely fine. In fact, I low-key believe that this is one of the things that makes Iga special. She doesn't need to produce the highest level. Her base level is enough to get the job done most of the time. There just aren't that many matches where you would look back and say Iga really played badly. And then there's the mental aspect of Iga's game. Iga has been working with Polish psychologist Daria Abramowicz since 2019, and it's easy to see how far she's come in terms of dealing with her emotions. Her psychologist has not only helped her with maintaining focus during play, but also between points and games. But someone out there might be like, okay, sure Noah, but the best player in the WTA hasn't actually played that great in 4 out of 5 slams. What do you have to say about that? Well, I'd say you're making a great point. It's a real head-scratcher. 1 minute, she's making a mockery of the doubters, bageling her opponents, and looking unbeatable. You start thinking, she's got this season in the bag, 3 majors minimum. But then she'll fall short of reaching the final rounds of the slams. Confusing, right? Iga lost to a player outside the top 50 in the 3rd round of this year's Australian Open, and then she lost to Jelena Ostapenko in the 4th round of the US Open last year. There was also the quarterfinal loss to Alina Svitolina at Wimbledon, and then a 4th round loss in straight sets against Elena Rybakina at the 2023 Australian Open. So yeah, we are in that rare place where the most dominant player on the tour hasn't quite performed across the board. Everyone expects Świątek to win on all surfaces, but it's very rare to see that happen. We could draw parallels with Rafa's game on the men's side. He's been kicking butt on clay since he was like 3 years old or something? But as Rafa entered into his prime years between 2008 and 2013, we saw that dominance on all surfaces, beating Federer at Wimbledon and the Australian Open, while also winning the US Open a number of times during those years. It's not hard to imagine that being the case for Iga too. We saw her putting in the work on the grass courts last year, and we already know how good she is on hard courts. I can agree that as dominant as Iga is, she has had her share of wild losses, but so has every other top player. So in my opinion, this isn't that big of a deal. But let me take you guys back to this statement that Sabalenka recently made during the pre-tournament conference in Rome.
Obviously, Iga is much better on clay than me, for example. I would say Elena is better on grass, and I'm maybe a little bit better on hard court, but at the same time, I cannot say that it's all about the surface because, I mean, as the time shows that I can beat them on clay, on hard, on grass.
Do you completely agree with everything she said? Honestly, I can see where Sabalenka was coming from, but you can trust Iga fans to cook up a comeback. One fan asked why Sabalenka wasn't number 1 then, since most tournaments were played on hard courts. Another fan reminded Sabalenka that Iga had 8 big titles on hard courts compared to Sabalenka's 5, and also the fact that Sabalenka had suffered so many defeats to Iga on hard courts. Iga also leads their head-to-head 8-3, with all of Sabalenka's wins going the distance. I honestly believe Arena didn't mean to start anything with those comments, but the point is that Iga has become so good that she might be miles ahead of even her closest rivals. Let's start with the Grand Slams. Iga has 4 at the moment, which is the same number as Sabalenka, Coco Gauff, and Rybakina. Iga now has a mind-boggling 10 WTA 1000 titles, and wait, she's only 22 years old. How many WTA 1000s do Sabalenka, Rybakina, and Gauff have? 8 titles in total, and Iga has more big titles than the rest of the top 5 combined. And how many weeks have her rivals been at the top of the ranking? Never mind, I'm not going to make that comp because it'll just be unfair. Point made, Iga stands alone at the top. But she keeps losing to Rybakina. Now, how does that keep happening? Well, for me, the answer is simple. No matter how dominant you are as a player, there's always going to be that matchup that you might struggle with. For Rybakina, she can serve lights out, create pace with those cross-court forehands to Iga's forehand, which makes Iga a bit uncomfortable. In the past, you could even see the frustration on Iga's face. She doesn't like to be smothered, she wants to dictate the points against hard-hitting players like Rybakina who take time away, and it's a lot more difficult, so Iga ends up leaking a lot of errors on her forehand and not doing enough damage on the return. Rybakina leads their head-to-head 4-2 and has beaten Iga twice on clay, in Stuttgart and in Rome. If it came down to who I thought was more of a threat to Iga in any matchup, I would 100% pick a healthy Rybakina over Sabalenka simply because of the style of play. For this to change, Iga has to work on a number of things. Now, truth be told, she's already working on being less predictable. Rather than fighting fire with fire, Iga might need to add more variety to her game with the slice, drop shots, and more spins to change the momentum of the game and expose Rybakina's movement rather than just playing into her hands. It's for a similar reason that Iga has suffered against Jelena Ostapenko. I'd love to see Iga's problem-solving skills shine against players that excel at first-strike tennis like Rybakina and Ostapenko. I would also love to see more from her net game as well. Switching gears now, I need to update you guys on something. Lately, we've been thinking about the direction of the channel. As you might already know, we had 2 copyright strikes from ATP Media, which is such a bummer because we were really just trying to bring you the best quality tennis content. We've already reached out to the ATP to clarify the situation and look for a possible solution. In the coming weeks, we hope that video production will be back to normal, and I just have to say that I appreciate all the support that I've received from you guys. But if anything does happen to Courtside Tennis, we'll be in touch via the newsletter, so if you aren't yet subscribed to the newsletter, now would be the best time to do so. I'll leave the link in the description. But don't worry, it's not all doom and gloom. I do have some good news for y'all. We're working on designs for our merchandise this week, and hopefully by the end of the week, we'll have more designs ready for our Courtside Tennis shop. On top of that, we're having our subscribers help us pick the designs, since we're basically making it for you as a thank you for supporting the channel. You can support me and help keep the channel going by placing your orders once we hit the ground running on the merch. Okay, back to the video. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that one of the worst things to happen to a player would be comparing them to the all-time greats, more so at an early age. Iga is only 22, but she's gradually putting herself in that elite level status. Make no mistake, I'm not saying she's there yet, but the signs are auspicious and we can see the trajectory for ourselves. One could even argue that in a different era, Iga's numbers could have even put a player into those GOAT conversations already. Back in 2020, the statement was already clear. As world number 54, Świątek won her first Grand Slam title at Roland Garros, winning all 7 of her matches in straight sets and without losing more than 4 games in any set. And she followed that up with a top 10 debut the following year. Between February and early July 2022, Świątek went 37 matches unbeaten, the longest winning streak of the 21st century. She claimed 6 titles along the way as she established her stay at the top of the rankings. That same year, she also became the first player since Serena Williams in 2013 to collect over 11,000 ranking points in a single season, too. Not too shabby. Iga's level dropped in 2023 and she temporarily lost that #1 spot, but she still managed to win 6 titles in a campaign that wasn't as statistically dominant as the previous season. And now, here we are in 2024 with Iga back to being at her very best. With 21 WTA titles from 25 finals, 4 Grand Slams, 10 WTA 1000 titles, the WTA finals, all at 22 years old, let that sink in. There really isn't much to say at this point. In fact, only these legends won more titles at that age. Oh, and she's also spent over 100 weeks as world #1 and is in this exclusive company right here. But at the same time, we really shouldn't be making these comparisons just yet. I understand that it can be very tempting to do so, but it really doesn't help that much. Iga is literally just running the table at this point, and how she manages to do all of this against very respectable opponents is crazy. For so long, there was talk about the lack of depth on the WTA Tour. But now everything has changed, and this makes what Iga's doing even more special. The playing field has gotten a lot stronger, but Iga continues to dish out bagels and breadsticks like she owns her own bakery. Just the other day, I watched how she saved all 10 breakpoints against Madison Keys in the quarterfinal in Rome, and then created a scoreline that made it seem as though the match was one-sided. It reminded me of how often we see Iga winning tournaments without dropping a set or only dropping a few games. As a neutral fan, I'd love to see more intense rivalries for Świątek because sometimes I just get tired of seeing so many bagels. Meanwhile, the French Open is around the corner and Iga is on a mission to win the Triple Crown of Madrid, Rome, and Roland Garros. Serena Williams is the only woman to have accomplished the feat in the history of the WTA. But at this point, I have no reason to think Świątek can't do the triple. But there's just one topic left to address. For those who might have missed out on the news, the world #1 became the first athlete to sign a worldwide brand ambassadorship with the beauty company Lancôme last month. On top of that, she has partnerships and endorsements with Visa, Porsche, Rolex, and Lego. Last year, she became the first female tennis player to be sponsored by Roger Federer-backed Swiss company On. Lately, Iga has been killing it from a marketing standpoint. She might not have that personality that wants to be in front of a microphone, but she's already beating those unmarketable allegations one photo shoot at a time. I find her personality off the court to be very charming, and it's clear that at this point, as she continues to let her racket do the talking on the court, it's only a matter of time before she gets the respect she deserves. In my opinion, Iga has elevated the women's game. She came at a time when there was a huge void left from Ash Barty's retirement, and she hasn't looked back since then. Iga's dominance has taken the level of tennis on the WTA to the next level. It might be hard to see everything that is happening, but I think we can all agree on the fact that we're witnessing a generational talent. Iga turns 23 at the end of this month. I know the comparisons with the all-time greats will continue for as long as she's playing. It's also quite obvious that Sabalenka and Rybakina will continue to give her a run for her money. But at the end of the day, Iga is in a league of her own. At least, I believe so. But what are your thoughts about Iga Świątek? There's a huge gap in coverage and deep dives about top players on the WTA Tour. I hope to continue with the deep dives on both tours. That's if we don't get canceled before then. If you loved this video, please hit that subscribe button and help us towards our goal of 100,000 subscribers before the end of the year. And of course, if there's any other video you want to see, let us know in the comments. Until next time, keep swinging.